The guns fell silent at 11 a.m. on November 11, 1918. After 4 years of blood and fire, the First World War was over. Soldiers climbed out of trenches, dazed by the sudden quiet. Families celebrated in the streets. Leaders promised a war to end all wars. But peace was an illusion. In the shadows of victory parades, seeds of the next catastrophe were already being planted. In the smoke-filled rooms of diplomats, in the hunger-filled streets of defeated nations, and in the whispers of political radicals, the world was setting the stage for a disaster even greater than the one it had just survived. This is the story of the years between the wars, the fragile peace of 1918, and the unstoppable march toward 1939. 1918 to 1923. The peace that wasn't the armistice of November. 1918 was not a treaty of friendship. It was a ceasefire with a clock ticking toward resentment. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in June 1919, punished Germany with crushing reparations, territorial losses, and a humiliating admission of guilt for starting the war. For the victorious Allies, it was justice. For the Germans, it was betrayal, a stab in the back that nationalist politicians would never let them forget. Meanwhile, Europe was bleeding in more ways than one. Millions were dead. Millions more were homeless. The Spanish flu pandemic swept across the globe, killing more people than the war itself. In 1919 alone, it claimed tens of millions of lives, striking rich and poor, soldier and civilian alike. Across Eastern Europe, empires collapsed. The Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German empires vanished almost overnight, replaced by fragile new nations like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. Each came into existence surrounded by enemies, with borders drawn by diplomats far from the lands they divided. In Russia, revolution turned into civil war. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, fought a desperate battle against the White Armies, foreign intervention forces, and internal rebellion. By 1922, they had emerged victorious, forming the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. But their victory came at the cost of famine, political terror, and millions of lives. Elsewhere, instability became the new normal. In Germany, political uprisings shook the fragile Weimar Republic. In Italy, the war's chaos opened the door to a new political movement, fascism, led by a fiery ex-socialist named Benito Mussolini. By 1922, Mussolini's March on Rome would make him prime minister, turning Italy into the world's first fascist state. The peace that had been promised in 1918 was already beginning to crack. 1924 to 1929. The illusion of stability. By the mid-1920s, it seemed like the world might finally be healing. The wounds of war were still raw, but the economies of Europe and the United States began to recover. Jazz filled the clubs of New York and Paris, cities grew, skyscrapers rose, and cars rolled off assembly lines in numbers never before imagined. In Germany, American loans and the Dawes Plan stabilized the currency and tamed hyperinflation, which in 1923 had been so bad that people carried wages home in wheelbarrows and burned banknotes for heat. The League of Nations, founded with the dream of preventing future wars, brokered agreements like the Locarno Treaties of 1925, where Germany, France, and Belgium pledged to respect each other's borders. Some dared to believe that cooperation could replace conflict. Culturally, the 1920s were revolutionary. Women gained the right to vote in many countries. Art movements like Surrealism and Bauhaus redefined creativity. Cinema became a global phenomenon, with silent film stars like Charlie Chaplin and Greta Garbo captivating audiences. But beneath the music, the dancing, and the modern optimism, danger still brewed. Nationalists in Japan dreamed of empire. In Germany, extremists waited for their moment. And in the Soviet Union, Lenin's death in 1924 triggered a brutal power struggle between Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky, a struggle that Stalin would win, cementing his absolute control by the decade's end. It was a world enjoying a fragile calm, not realizing that the storm was already on the horizon. 1929 to 1933, the Great Depression and the rise of dictators. On October 29, 1929, the day that would be remembered as Black Tuesday, the U.S. stock market collapsed. It wasn't just a dip, it was an avalanche. Within hours, billions of dollars in wealth vanished into thin air. Investors were ruined. Banks teetered on the edge of collapse. And what began as a financial panic in New York soon became the Great Depression, a global economic catastrophe. Factories shut their gates. Entire industries ground to a halt. In the United States, unemployment soared to 1 in 4 workers. Families lined up in the cold for bread and soup. Homeless men built shanty towns, bitterly nicknamed Hoovervilles after President Herbert Hoover, on the edges of cities. In Germany, a once marginal political agitator named Adolf Hitler saw his moment arrive. Leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis, Hitler exploited the nation's humiliation over the Treaty of Versailles, stoked fear of communism, and promised to restore Germany's greatness. His speeches were fiery, emotional, and filled with the conviction that he alone could save the country. In January 1933, he was appointed Chancellor. Within months, the Reichstag fire, the Enabling Act, and a campaign of terror against political opponents transformed him from a politician into a dictator. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin launched his 5-year plans, ambitious programs to industrialize the country at breakneck speed. Massive factories, dams, and railways were built, but at a staggering human cost. Collectivization of agriculture led to famine, most infamously in Ukraine, where millions perished in the Holodomor. Purges and forced labor camps claimed countless more lives. Yet Stalin emerged more powerful than ever, his control over the USSR absolute. By the close of 1933, the map of global politics had shifted dramatically. Democracy was in retreat. Authoritarian regimes in Rome, Berlin, Tokyo, and Moscow were gaining strength, united not by ideology, but by a shared disdain for the fragile international order. The Great Depression had not only shattered economies, it had shattered faith in cooperation. The world, still haunted by the memory of the First World War, was now sliding, almost unconsciously, toward another confrontation, one that would be far deadlier than the last. 1934 to 1938, the road to war. By the mid-1930s, the fragile peace was in its final days. Hitler's Germany openly defied the Treaty of Versailles, rebuilding its army, remilitarizing the Rhineland in 1936, and forging alliances with Fascist Italy and militarist Japan, the Axis powers. In Spain, civil war erupted in 1936 between a left-wing Republican government and right-wing nationalists led by Francisco Franco. The conflict became a brutal testing ground for new weapons and tactics, as Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy sent troops and aircraft to support Franco, while the Soviet Union backed the Republicans. Elsewhere, signs of coming catastrophe multiplied. Japan expanded deeper into China in 1937, unleashing atrocities like the Nanking Massacre. In Europe, Hitler annexed Austria in the 1938 Anschluss, meeting little resistance. That same year, Britain and France, desperate to avoid another war, signed the Munich Agreement, allowing Germany to take the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned from Munich, claiming peace for our time. But it was not peace. It was surrender to aggression. For millions, the world felt like it was holding its breath. The horrors of the First World War had been burned into memory, yet the nations of the world seemed powerless or unwilling to stop the march toward another. Conclusion: shadows before the storm. In 1918, the world believed it had fought the war to end all wars. By 1938, it was clear that belief had been a tragic illusion. In just 20 years, economic collapse, political extremism, and unchecked aggression had undone the fragile peace. The Treaty of Versailles had failed to prevent conflict. The League of Nations had failed to enforce it. And now, in the dying months of 1938, with Hitler's ambitions growing, Stalin's power cemented, and Japan's armies on the move, the question was no longer if there would be another world war, but when. The answer would come in less than a year. The world had survived one cataclysm, but the worst was yet to come.